Hey guys, it's Jan, also known as Bluster, and today we are taking a look at my Scion of the Dragon Commander deck, a 5-color legendary dragon, and it has a built-in tutor ability that allows it to search my library for any dragon card and put it into the graveyard, and then it becomes a copy of that dragon. So it has a built-in tutor that allows me to do a reanimation strategy based on that particular ability. So one of my favorite dragons ever printed. So decided to build a deck around it. Essentially, I started building this deck for I don't know how long, basically when they first started doing the EDH format. So I've changed it a lot over the years, and it's very focused now. So let's take a quick look at the Planeswalkers first. So let's set that aside. Liliana, Tamio, and Sarkhan right here. So let's put those right there. I think you should be able to see all of them. These three cards are essentially on board ways for me to interact with a lot of stuff. Liliana's first ability is the most important one, so we'll just cover that one. And then the last one, it kind of helps to +1, each player discards a card. Essentially, what I use her for is to put my dragons into the graveyard and then also mess with the hands of my opponents. That allows me to cheat the dragons into play by using my reanimation package of cards that I'm going to be showing you guys later. And then the -6 kind of messes up one of my opponents as well too, where I can split their permanents and then have them choose what to keep and what they don't want to keep. The -2 ability, not as relevant, so sometimes it can hit one of their commanders, so it can always be kind of okay, but it's almost always just subpar ability. So next one, let's take a look at Tamio. The first two abilities we're not really going to cover. The second one is more of like an ability that slows down my opponents. First one doesn't really happen as much because I usually don't have small creatures to attack with to use that first ability, but the last ability is the draw 3 cards. I get an emblem with I may cast non-land cards from my hand without paying their mana cost. So generally this kind of helps me accelerate the game. If I'm able to randomly hit one of my big spells like my big dragons off of that ultimate ability, that's always a good thing. So I really like Tamio in my deck. And then next is Sarkhan, the best planeswalker in my deck. All three of the abilities are strong. Draw a card, then add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. The -2 is makes a 4/4 dragon creature with flying. That's always good. And then -8 is I search my library for any number of dragon creature cards and put them onto the battlefield. That allows me to just be able to, once I get the -8 ability, it's able to just put all my dragons into play, and most of the time I'm going to get haste on all my dragons, and then I'm just able to attack everybody that turn. So that's always a good thing. All of these planeswalkers interact with this card, Doubling Seasons. You guys should be able to see this. This card allows me to double the amount of loyalty that gets put onto the planeswalkers. So the first ability is if an effect would put 1 or more tokens into play under your control, it puts twice that many into play instead. That doubles the amount of tokens that I can get. Sarkhan gets an additional 4/4. If I make tokens into play that also become their own tokens, that doubles them. The next ability, if an effect would place 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, it places twice that many on that permanent instead. So this one interacts with some of my artifacts and then mainly the loyalty abilities of my planeswalkers. It doubles the amount of loyalty that they get, so that allows me to ultimate right away. So Tamio triggers right away, and so does Sarkhan. So that advances my clock and my strategy very quickly. So we'll go on to the dragons. The first two dragons that we're going to cover are the ones that are pretty much mostly defensive. Let's look at Yosei and Silumgar. Let's look. Yosei is when Yosei, the Morning Star, is put into a graveyard from play, target player skips his or her next untapped step, tap up to 5 target permanents that player controls. So If my Scion gets destroyed, sometimes I want to just use Yosei, put him into the graveyard. It becomes a copy. Scion turns into Yosei, and then the ability triggers. When it dies, it taps out the permanents of that opponent. For me, I usually choose them, and then they end up getting screwed for like one turn. That usually kind of finishes the game for them sometimes, because other people could gang up and beat them, or I could finish them off if I'm playing just one-on-one. Next is Silumgar. The main ability for Silumgar is the Hexproof ability. So it's mainly defensive if it gets targeted. If Scion gets targeted, sometimes I reply with searching Silumgar, becomes a copy of that, and then it gains Hexproof. The second ability, whenever a dragon you control attacks defending creature player controls, get -1/-1 until end of turn. Sometimes it helps soften up the defenses of the opponent, and that helps sometimes as well. But I don't usually do it for being able to attack with Silumgar. The next three, they're all kind of similar in their function, specifically for being able to put the opponents at a much quicker clock. Atarka allows me to get double strike on all my dragons when they attack, and then the other two, Karthus, Tyrant of Jund, and Dragon Lord Kolaghan, essentially just give my dragons haste. That allows me to attack right away once both of them or one of them is in play for me. Next one is my Recursion Dragon. Pretty important in the deck in my opinion. Bladewing the Risen. It combos pretty well with one of my other tutors. Bladewing the Risen, when it comes into play, I return target dragon permanent card from my graveyard to the battlefield. So if I had another dragon in my graveyard, I can play Bladewing and I can get that card back into play, and then I'm able to get an additional value. For 7 mana, I can get basically 14 mana out of it if I get one of my bigger dragons from my graveyard to play. So always good. It's like a 2-for-1. Niv Mizzet, the Firemind. One of my combo pieces that I'm actually going to cover towards the end of the video. Niv Mizzet is one of the stronger cards in the deck. It allows me to do two things. It's like a draw engine. So whenever you draw a card, Niv Mizzet deals 1 damage to target creature or player, and then a tap draw card. Sometimes if I don't have my other combo piece, I can just use it to just draw cards. That's always pretty good. And then it deals damage whenever I draw a card, so that's always a good thing. Next one of my combo is this is more of a pair of dragons that help each other for the combo. First, let's take a look at World Gorger Dragon. So if you guys are aware of World Gorger Dragon, you guys should be able to guess what the combo is. When World Gorger Dragon comes into play, remove all other permanents you control from the game. And when it leaves play, I return the removed cards into play under their owner's control. And then this essentially becomes like a combo with Animate Dead. This card, we're not going to read through it. It's too long. Animate Dead, what it essentially does is it puts a creature card from my graveyard into play, and it puts itself on it. It allows me to get the World Gorger Dragon out, right? Once it's in play, the World Gorger Dragon ability removes the Animate Dead from it, and that removes all of the stuff that's in play and removes them from the game. And then once the World Gorger Dragon's ability triggers, it removes Animate Dead. Once Animate Dead gets removed from play, it puts everything back. So what it does is that it untaps my lands. So every time this cycles, this triggers the ability for me to put the Animate Dead back onto the World Gorger Dragon. So I'll keep doing it up until I have essentially infinite mana, and then it allows me to trigger the rest of my deck. Now, I can use that to look for Scion of the Ur Dragon, or cast Scion from my graveyard, from my command zone, and then start using its tutor ability that allows me to get all the dragons into the graveyard. And then at last point, I'm going to turn the Scion into a Hellkite Charger, and then I will use animate dead and put it on the Hellkite charger, and then use that to be able to attack with every dragon that I've put in the graveyard. Sometimes I'm able to do it with my other reanimation cards, or even just on their own. I can win sometimes with just 2 dragons into play as long as nobody's able to destroy them. So I could get infinite mana from the World Gorger Dragon, and then use that infinite mana to turn it into infinite combat steps with the Hellkite Charger. Let's look at Hellkite Charger real quick to see what it does. So whenever Hellkite Charger attacks, you may pay 7. If you do, untap all attacking creatures after this phase. There is an additional combat phase. So 7 mana, attack again. So I can keep doing it with the infinite mana of the World Gorger Dragon. And then the other main ability, I might as well talk about it now, is Curiosity with Niv Mizzet. So let's read Curiosity. It's a little bit of a fragile combo because it relies on an enchant creature. Whenever an enchanted creature, the enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw cards. So that triggers Niv Mizzet's ability that whenever you draw a card, it deals 1 damage. Now that triggers Curiosity again, so it keeps going up until that opponent dies. So it'll only work on 1 opponent at a time, so keep that in mind. You can't just target everybody and then everybody dies. Niv Mizzet only kills 1 opponent at a time. So I've had that happen where I've killed 1 person and then the other people have survived. So it's always one of the things that you have to think about. Next, we are going to take a look at my reanimation strategy. I've already mentioned Animate Dead, so we'll go past that. We're going to take a look at Unburial Rites, Reanimate, Patriarch's Bidding, and Living Death. Living Death and Patriarch's Bidding kind of work the same way. They both put cards from my graveyard into play. With Patriarch's Bidding, I choose a creature type, which is dragons. With Living Death, it's more of like a dance of what's in the graveyard and what I get to put back into play. So let's look at Living Death first. Set aside all creature cards in all graveyards, and put each creature card that's in play into its owner's graveyard. So whatever's in play goes into the graveyard, and then whatever was in the graveyard before the spell was cast is now put into play. So we put them in there. So this definitely works well with Scion, and then my other with Liliana as well. And then Patriarch's Bidding, the same thing, but everybody gets to choose a creature type. For me, since I'm more of a focused dragon deck, I can just say dragon, and whatever dragons are in my graveyard just get it put into play. And it's generally like a one-sided thing. While everybody's getting whatever creature type that they choose. Sometimes they don't even have like a creature type that's predominant in their deck. So Patriarch's Bidding is one of my stronger reanimation cards. Next is Unburial Rites, is more of a single target one, but the good thing with it is that it has flashback. And then the other one is Reanimate, a little bit cost intensive in terms of the amount of life, because you have to pay life equal to the converted mana cost of the card and then put it into play. But it's mana effective, mana cost effective, because it's just 1 mana to do it. Next, we are going to go through my mana rocks. A lot of them are mostly color fixing, and then the others are basically just for helping get everything going. So Chrome Mox, it's just a 0 mana color fixing, essentially, because it's a 2-for-1. It becomes kind of a problem when having to, basically it's like a 2-for-1. It's a little bit tough to do it because sometimes the spell that you're imprinting, you kind of need it later. So it's always kind of an emergency when you do it, but really only if you get it in your opening hand, you're more likely to do it very quickly to use it right away. Next is the Arcane Signet, really strong 2-for just any color that fixes Felwar Stone. It's pretty much the same thing. It allows me to get a land color that essentially my opponents can produce, and anytime that this happens, usually it benefits me anyway because I use all 5 colors, and then that basically is fine with me. And then the other 3-mana ones, the Dragon's Horde. It allows me to put a gold counter on the Dragon's Horde for it to be able to tap, and then when I remove the gold counter from it, draw a card. So it has like a semi card draw engine slightly. Taps for any color. This interacts well with Doubling Season as well. Coalition Relic, the same thing. It can put a charge counter on itself, but when you remove a charge counter from it during pre-combat main phase, it adds mana equal to the amount of charge counters you remove. This works well with Doubling Season in play as well. Let's look at Chromatic Lantern. This is the strongest one. It allows my lands to tap for any color, and then it also taps for any color itself as well. And then the last one is Skyclave Relic, which also interacts very well with Doubling Season. Mainly when you use the kicker ability. When Skyclave Relic enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create 2 tap tokens that are copies of Skyclave Relic. So instead, with Doubling Season out, I get 4 total copies of Skyclave Relic. So the next turn, I can tap for 5 of any color with 6 mana on Skyclave Relic. Let's set those aside, and then we'll go to my creature mana acceleration. Noble Hierarch and Birds of Paradise all pretty much kind of do the same thing. So those are basically just fix my colors. The difference is that Noble Hierarch pretty much just gives me green, white, or blue, and then it has an exalted trigger. So whenever if one of my dragons attacks on its own, it gives it +1/+1. And Essica is the other one where it kind of helps my dragons. They can allow my dragons to tap 4 mana as well. So other legendary creatures you control have Vigilance and tap, add 1 mana of any color. So it actually gives my dragons more versatility. So they get Vigilance, they don't tap when they attack. And then if you attack later on the second main phase, you can use them to tap to be able to play other cards like more dragons and stuff like that. And then the other part of the ability, which is a Prismatic Bridge. So I can choose to play it as a Prismatic Bridge if I draw Essica late in the game. At the beginning of my upkeep, reveal cards from the top of my library until I reveal a creature or planeswalker and put it onto the battlefield. So this is pretty good for me. Generally, I get dragons out because they're the most that I can get. I have more of them than my mana accelerating creatures. And then I can also randomly get like a Tamio or like a Sarkhan. That always is a pretty good thing for me as well. Those cards are very synergistic. And then my land search and the land acceleration package. Let's look at these ones. These are all pretty much fairly similar. The only difference is that Fertile Ground is an enchantment. And then the other 3 kind of work the same way. So let's look at Fertile Ground. This one, I have to put it on a land. So whenever enchanted land is tapped for mana, it produces an additional 1 mana of any color. So it's just an accelerator. The Farseek and 3 visits and what is the other card? Nature's Lore. They all kind of work pretty much the same way. Basically, for 3 visits, search for a forest card and put that card onto the battlefield. The same with Nature's Lore. The only difference with Farseek is that I have to search for anything other than a forest, so like a plains, island, swamp, or mountain. All 3 of these work well with dual lands and shock lands as well, because I can basically accelerate and then also fix my colors as well. And then my 4 mana acceleration. These are kind of the priciest one. Skyshroud Claim is my stronger one. Let's look at that first. Search my library for up to 2 forest cards and put them into play. So I can search for 2 dual lands or 2 shock lands, essentially, as long as they're both forests. And then Hunting Wilds, not quite as strong as the other, as the Skyshroud Claim, but it has a little bit of versatility with Kicker. Search my library for up to 2 forest cards and put them into play tapped, so that's a little slower. Next, if the kicker cost was paid, untap all forests, put it into play this way, they become 3/3 green creatures with haste that are still lands. So sometimes I'm able to attack for just a little bit of extra damage it could win the game sometimes, but I've never been able to do it. But essentially, just an extra damage output for the deck. You know, sometimes it helps. Every little bit helps. And then we'll go through the removal package. So we'll not be able to read everything on board, but we can all pretty much do very similar things. Some of them can only do like non-land permanents. If I recall correctly, most of them can hit pretty much everything. So I've chosen them mainly for their quickness, like Assassin's Trophy, target permanent and opponent controls. It's 2 mana and it's an instant. They might get a basic land card back from it, but that's okay. D-Spark is another 2 mana one. Exile target permanent, converted mana cost 4 or greater. So it's a little restrictive because of the mana cost thing, but that's fine. It's like a 2 mana, pretty much anything big I can hit. Next is the Anguished Unmaking. It's a non-land permanent one, but it's an instant speed one. I lose 3 life. That's okay with me. Life is a resource in Magic, so that's fine. And then Utter End is 4 mana, exile target non-land permanent. So it's 4 mana. It's okay. It's a little pricey, but it's instant speed, so I still prefer being able to hold that up sometimes. And then last is Vindicate. Let's look at Vindicate. It's 3 mana, destroy target permanent. So just outright any permanent that you can hit and that you can target it for 3 mana. That's always a good thing. Pinpoint removal. Sometimes people don't put enough in their deck, and that's actually one of the more important things. At least for me, I like to put at least this much, around 5. Is always strong. This is now my tutor package, one of my most important ones. The first two different ones. Let's look at the enchantments first. Kind of pricey now. This card is on the reserved list. Let's see. Survival of the Fittest. Choose and discard a creature card. Search your library for a creature card and reveal that card to all players. Put it into your hand. So this works very well with my reanimation strategy. Sometimes I could search for like cycle to 2 or maybe 3 dragons, and then later on Patriarch's Bidding. Always a good thing. And Tomb interacts very well with my reanimation strategy as well. I can search my library for any creature card and put it into the graveyard. That's pretty much what it says, and I can do that at instant speed. So at the end of their turn, I could do it, look for whatever dragon that I needed specifically, and then put it into the graveyard. The next 5, Limdul's Vault is in here, more of a placeholder for some other cards that I want to get later on. I want to actually turn that into an Imperial Seal. So let's take a quick look at Limdul's Vault first, and then let's actually read one of the newest ones. Look at the top 5 cards of your library as many times as you choose. You may pay 1 life. Put those cards on the bottom, and then I look at the top 5 cards of the library again. So I can keep paying 1 life for every 5 cards that I look at, and then that's kind of like a pseudo tutor, but it actually gets around the search. This doesn't search your deck. This goes through 5 cards every 1 life that you choose. So it gets around that wording. That's pretty good. The tutors are all kind of pretty much the same. Demonic Tutor and Grim Tutor are pretty much very similar. The only difference is the life loss. Let's look at Demonic Tutor real quick. Search your library for 1 card and put it into your hand. And Grim Tutor is pretty much the same thing. The difference is that there's a cost of 3 life associated to it, and then there's 1 extra black mana cost for it. Vampiric Tutor and Grim Tutor work very similarly. Let's look at where is that? Cruel Tutor. Real quick, search your deck for any card, shuffle your deck, and put that card on top of it, and then I lose 2 life. With Vampiric Tutor, pretty much the same thing. The difference is that it's 1 mana and it's an instant, so it's much better. But like, since I'm using a lot of tutors, as many tutors as I can, I usually try to put in the deck. And then these ones are the off-color tutors. Let's look at Personal Tutor. Intuition, Enlightened Tutor, and Mystical Tutor. Mystical Tutor and Enlightened Tutor are pretty much similar things, except um, they have specific things that they are looking for. Enlightened Tutor finds an artifact or enchantment and puts it into the top of my deck. Mystical Tutor, the difference is that I can only find instants and sorceries with it and puts it on top. Intuition, let's look at Intuition right here. Search your library for any 3 cards and reveal them to target opponent. He or she chooses one, put that card into my hand, and the rest in the graveyard. So I like to use this with Burial Rites and Bladewing the Risen, and then one other dragon. Sometimes if they only give me that other off dragon, that's okay, because I can still use Burial Rites to get the Bladewing the Risen back from my graveyard to play, or any other dragon that's in there as well. So that's the main package that I like to get for Intuition. Personal Tutor is the most restrictive one, but that's still pretty good. It allows me to search for a sorcery, and then I put it on top of my deck. I could get removal, like I could get a Vindicate for it, or I could get my board wipes, which is in this next section. Let's take a look at Toxic Deluge, Crux of Fate, and Cyclonic Rift. Let's see over here. So Toxic Deluge, let's look at the sorceries real quick. I pay life to be able to -X, -X. So if I pay 5 life, all creatures get -5 until end of turn. So sometimes that's good enough for me to wipe the board, but not my dragons, because sometimes a decent amount of my dragons will actually survive from that. Crux of Fate is more of a pick. If I want to destroy all dragon creatures, which I don't want to do, I usually just pick the second ability, which says destroy all non-dragon creatures. That wipes the board of everything else except for my dragons, and that's a really good board state for me. And then let's go back to Cyclonic Rift. Let's just go directly into the overload, because that's really the most important one. If you overload, return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. So I can board wipe during somebody else's end step and then be able to clear my attackers, essentially, so that I don't have to worry about any blockers at that point. Next is my draw package. These are pretty much the classic pieces that most decks use. Sylvan Library, Underworld Connections, Phyrexian Arena, and Rhystic Study. Sensei's Divining Top is more of a filter for the top of my deck. Look at the top 3 cards of my library and put them back in any order. So this basically filters, and it allows me to basically get the best out of the top 3 cards of my deck. Sometimes drawing an emergency card would actually work pretty well on this one, especially in Commander. Rhystic Study is more of like a card that slows other people down, and then it allows you to draw extra cards. Always a pretty good thing at the cost of 1 mana. And remember, this is a common that actually is one of the priciest commons that you can see in Magic. The other 2, Phyrexian Arena and Underworld Connections, kind of function pretty much the same way. At the cost of 1 life, you can draw an additional card. Arena is restricted to just drawing during your upkeep. Underworld Connections, you have to put it on a land to tap it to draw a card. Sylvan Library is the strongest one. For a mere 2 mana, you are able to essentially draw an additional 2 cards during your draw phase, but for each one, if you want to keep one, you have to pay 4 life. If you're really desperate to just keep drawing more, you can pay 8 life and then keep both of those cards and then advance your board state that way. Essentially giving you extra draws is always a good thing. Last one is kind of like a tutor, and then just a way for me to cheat creatures into play without having to pay too much mana for them. Let's look at Selvalis Stampede. Surprised how pretty strong this is. So it's starting with me. People vote for wild or for free. Reveal cards from the top of my library until I reveal a creature card for each wild vote, and then I put those creature cards onto the battlefield. and then I may put a permanent card from my hand onto the battlefield for each free vote. So it's almost always like a mixed bag between wild or free. So um, generally, I get a random free spell from my hand that I get to put into play if I have some dragons, and then a wild allows me to get creatures into play directly. So that's always a good thing. For 6 mana for this ability, pretty strong. And then over here is just my lands. I have some duels in here that I've been building up to, and then my shock lands are here as well. Excuse me. The duels are pretty strong because they don't have a restriction of coming into play tapped. The shocklands are a little bit worse because, of course, you have to pay 2 life to be able to put them into play untapped. So that makes them a little bit more restrictive. But for this deck, since it's 5 colors, you kind of have to run pretty much all 10 color pairings, And then the next is my fetch lands. Basically the same reason. It's just the main thing that you have to worry about in this deck is getting all of your colors available to you pretty much as quickly as you can. So in here I have the Zendikar Rising foils. I'm still looking for a copy of what do you call it? The Verdant Catacombs. I actually have a copy of Misty Reinforcer. I don't know why my app is showing the wrong one, so I can update that later. Basically, just each color pairing. This allows me to fix my colors much more quickly, and then also search out whatever specific forest. Generally, these are okay. This helps me get my colors correct the first time around. And then these are my color fixing lands. Most of them have a drawback, such as these, such as the Mana Confluence and the City of Brass at the cost of 1 life each, or essentially 1 life. It's 1 mana of any color. Command Tower is the best one of them. They both tap. That one taps for any color. Just in my commander's color identity, Reflecting Pool taps for whatever I can tap for. So if I have a City Brass in play, Reflecting Pool can tap for any color. Forbidden Orchard gives me any color, but I have to make a 1/1 token for my opponent, so that can kind of slow me down, but that's fine. I can usually get through that creature. And then Exotic Orchard is it taps for whatever color my opponent's lands can produce. So that's one of the copies of Felwar Stone, essentially. So, and then Opal Palace is like one of my weakest cards in here, but it gives a little bit of like extra damage that can come from my Scion. If I use it to tap, it gives it an additional +1/+1 counter. And then my utility lands, let's take a quick look at them. Really just slightly things that I can use to mitigate some of the problems that could happen. Like Command Beacon is one of my favorite ones. It allows me to minimize the amount of mana that I can spend. Basically this gets around 1 recasting of my Scion of the Ur Dragon, so I can sack it to put my commander into my hand. So directly I can cast it from there. And then Field of Ruin is kind of a funny card because it has some weird thing that it can do. Tap, sacrifice, Field of Ruin, destroy target non-basic land and opponent controls. Each player searches his or her library for a basic land and puts it onto the battlefield. Well, this function is actually a forced shuffle. So the best thing about it is that like when somebody uses their Vampiric Tutor or Enlightened Tutor or their Mystical Tutor, they have to put that card on top of their deck. When I activate Field of Ruin after they've done that, they're forced to shuffle even if they don't find a land that they put into play. They're forced to shuffle. So after they're forced to shuffle, they basically lose that card that they just tutored for with those couple of cards. So it's always a fun thing that I can do if I'm able to do it. But right now in the deck, there's no land recursion show. I'm still trying to figure out if I want to do that. So there you have it, guys. This has been my deck tech of the Scion of the Dragon, and it is kind of a pricey deck. So what you can do is that you can change some of the cards that are in here. So if you look, it's TCG mid is actually valuing the deck at $5,000. So yeah, it's kind of a pricey deck. A bunch of these cards I bought over time, so I just didn't just spend $5,000 and just build it out. But one of the most expensive stuff that you can put in the deck are the dual lands. So that actually really increases the amount that you have to spend if you go for the dual lands. So if you don't want to do that, you don't have to do that. So that makes the deck a lot cheaper if you just go for the shock lands. That's perfectly fine. Fetch lands with shock lands. And then an even more budget route would basically just change the mana base. The mana base is, you know, some of the most expensive parts of the deck. And then maybe some, you know, change out some of the tutors. And that's pretty much it, guys. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching. Go do one of your hobbies. Have fun.